Penguin Random House Audio presents Who is Government? The Untold Story of Public Service. Edited by Michael Lewis. Read for you by Michael Lewis, Casey Sepp, Dave Eggers, John Lanchester, Geraldine Brooks, Sarah Vowell, and W. Kamau Bell. Let the public service be a proud and lively career, and let every man and woman who works in any area of our national government, in any branch, at any level, be able to say with pride and with honor in future years, I served the United States government in that hour of our nation's need. President John F. Kennedy. Introduction. Directions to a Journalistic Goldmine. Written and read by Michael Lewis. After Donald Trump won his first presidential election, I had one of the strangest experiences I've ever had as a writer. The federal government had set aside a big pot of money for the candidates of both parties to staff their presidential transition teams. Trump and Hillary Clinton had both built massive teams of people ready to enter the 15 big federal departments and hundreds of smaller federal agencies to learn whatever was happening inside. 1,000 or so Obama officials were waiting for them, along with briefings that had taken them 6 months to prepare. But then, days after the election, Trump simply fired the 500 or so people on his transition team. Chris, you and I are so smart that we can leave the victory party 2 hours early and do the transition ourselves, he told a perplexed Chris Christie, who'd assembled the team. Then he appointed Rick Perry as his Secretary of Energy. In his own presidential campaign, Perry had called for the Energy Department's elimination and was forced, at his Senate confirmation hearings, to acknowledge that he'd had no real idea of what went on inside the Energy Department. But now that he'd spent a few days looking into it, he really did not want to eliminate it. At that moment, it became clear that none of these people, newly in charge of the United States government, had the faintest idea of what it did. The Energy Department, among its other critical functions, manages our nuclear weapons. And they weren't alone. I didn't really have any clue what went on inside the department either. People capable of ruining panel discussions and dinner parties with their steady stream of opinions about American politics were totally flummoxed by the simplest questions about American government. Questions like, what do all those civil servants do all day inside the Agriculture Department? They preserve rural America from extinction, among other things. This situation, though sad for the country, struck me as a happy journalistic opportunity. The outgoing Obama people had created what amounted to the most timely and relevant civics class ever, and no one had bothered to enroll. And so I signed up to audit it. I spent some weeks wandering around the Energy Department, where I was, I believe, the first to receive the briefing about, among other things, the nuclear stockpile. I spent some more weeks inside the Commerce Department, where I learned about, among other things, the life-changing improvements in weather prediction achieved by the National Weather Service. I consciously sought out the most obscure and infrequently visited corners of our federal government, and yet never found anything less than wonderful characters engaged in work critical to the fate of our country and our species. At some point, I realized that several dozen humans could spend their lifetimes getting the briefings ignored by the incoming Trump administration, and so I stopped and wrote a series of magazine pieces about what I'd seen and heard. I then stapled the pieces together and published them as a book, called The Fifth Risk. The pieces attracted more attention than just about any magazine articles I'd ever written, and the book sold roughly 10 times more copies than I or anyone else imagined it would. But even that wasn't what was strange about the experience. What was strange was what happened next. Nothing. A few times in my writing career, I've experienced the thrill of an unfair edge. Some special access or insight that was bound to vanish the minute it was revealed. Every Wall Street trader knows this feeling. You spot what appears to be some mispriced stock or bond, or complicated derivative. You figure out why it's mispriced. After all, lots of smart people are looking for free money, So you better have some idea why this anomaly exists, so that you can be certain it's an anomaly. I'd sort of assumed I had the federal bureaucracy more or less to myself, because the government had always seemed less interesting to readers than politics. Perhaps because it seemed so stable that nothing could shake it. I further assumed that after a book in which the central character is the agriculture department sold more than 500,000 copies, the market would correct. Clearly, there was a readership that hungered to know more about whatever Donald Trump was neglecting. The supply would expand to fill the demand. The curiosity of the American public would be slaked, and I need to find something else to write about. I was wrong. The Washington Post series, in which many of these pieces first appeared, also titled Who is Government, proves it. This time I was joined in my plundering of our government for stories by 6 other writers: Casey Sepp, Dave Eggers, John Lanchester, Geraldine Brooks, Sarah Vowell, and W. Kamau Bell. Their pieces are all great, but more to the point, they were among the most read opinion stories in the Post in 2024, averaging about 4 times the typical readership for the section, despite being 8 times the average length of its pieces. All 6 writers now have enjoyed the same experience that I had the first time around. Each has been surprised by how well it pays to write about federal bureaucrats. None required more than about 5 minutes to find a subject that made their socks go up and down. Each has more or less said to me, "I cannot believe how good this material is, and how overlooked." And yet the ARB still exists. These stories are still lying around inside our government like ore in a badly plundered mine. And I'm newly open to thoughts about why this might be. My original investment thesis, that the journalistic marketplace was just a bit slow to pick up on reader interest in this new existential threat to an institution everyone has long taken for granted, no longer really suffices. Everyone can now see the threat. And so some other forces must be at work here. One possibility, our media is less and less able to fund long-form storytelling, and these stories require time, money, and space. Another, our government, as opposed to our elected officials, has no talent for telling its own story. On top of every federal agency sit political operatives, whose job is not to reveal and explain the good work happening beneath them, but to prevent any of their employees from embarrassing the president. The PR wing of the federal government isn't really allowed to play offense, just a grinding prevent defense. And the sort of people who become civil servants, the characters profiled in this book, tend not to want or seek attention. And finally, there's the stereotype of the government worker. We all have in our heads this intractable picture, the 9-to-5er living off the taxpayer who adds no value and has no energy, and somehow still subverts the public will. You never know what effect any piece of writing will have. Writers write the words, but readers decide their meaning. My vague sense is that most readers of these stories have come away with feelings both of hope, these civic-minded people are still among us, and dread. We're letting something precious slip away. My own ambition for the Post series, and this book, was that they'd subvert the stereotype of the civil servant. The typecasting has always been lazy and stupid, but increasingly, it's deadly. Even as writers grow rich, proving it wrong. The Canary, read and written by Michael Lewis. Each spring, the most interesting organization that no one's ever heard of collects nominations for the most important awards that most people will never know were handed out. The organization, called the Partnership for Public Service, created the awards, called the Sammys, in 2002 to call out extraordinary deeds inside the federal government. Founded the year before by an entrepreneur named Samuel Heyman, it set out to attract talented and unusual people to the federal workforce. One big reason talented and unusual people did not gravitate to the government was that the government was often a miserable place for talented and unusual people to work. civil servants who...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?